A handful of months back, I did that thing where I slowly die inside, staring into a monitor for dozens of hours, gradually losing my grip on sanity from sleep deprivation in order to make a stupidly long video talking about every entry in a particular series. In this case, Hitman. All the time and effort ended up being worth it though. The final product did incredibly well, being received positively by all you guys and gals watching, and I'd like to start by saying thank you for that. It's nice to know when a video is worth all the work I put into it. Some people actually thought the length of that video was some intentionally planned meta-reference to IO Interactive, but no, that was just an accidental coincidence. Trust me, I'm not that clever. But once all was said and done and I had a chance to reflect, I came to the realization that by talking about all the Hitmans, I had also covered the majority of the developer's catalog. Since their founding in 1998, IO has put out a grand total of 11 titles, only 7 of which star the man with the barcode tattoo. Realizing this, I couldn't help but be overwhelmed by this feeling that things had been left unfinished. I mean, if I'm going to talk about most of the games from one particular company, I may as well cross my T's and go over the handful I missed while I'm at it, right? So, in the spirit of completionism, let's take a look at what IO does when they decide to branch out from their most famous franchise and see if the studio can make a compelling product about something other than contract killing.
Stand your ground, team!
Starting off the non-Hitman related train is Freedom Fighters, released in 2003. Published by EA well before they became the industry standard for evil, Freedom Fighters is one of those games people who played it back in the day will gush over if it ever comes up in conversation. While I wasn't one of those people, as I was too busy playing Max Payne 2 and Tony Hawk's Underground at the time, its cult classic status actually led to me trying it out of the blue a few years ago. But I never bothered to play it all the way through until capturing footage for this video, for reasons I'll get into in a bit. Since I played the game on PC, let's talk about getting it to run properly. The game boots up just fine on modern machines, but there are 2 things I highly recommend doing if you decide to play it yourself. First, consider downloading a widescreen patch from Nemesis 2000, who hosts a wide variety of patches for many classic games, including the Hitman series for those wondering how I was playing some of the older entries in 16:9. I'll leave a link for the site in the description. Once that's done, it is mandatory that you cap the game's frame rate at 60 using some kind of third-party program like Rivatuner. Much of the game's functionality is directly tied to frame rate, and failing to limit it will result in derpy animations and physics, broken scripting, and a fun little quirk where attempting to melee, which is literally the first thing the game asks you to do, will almost always transport you to a purgatory from which there is no escape. Freedom Fighters drops you into the boots of Chris, a normal everyday plumber thrust into the role of revolutionary when the Soviet Union unexpectedly invades the US. An opening exchange between Chris and his brother provides setup, but after that, the story becomes pretty thin. News broadcasts between missions show the state of the world and how your actions are viewed through the lens of Russian propaganda, but aside from that, the game lacks much personality outside of Wolverines! In addition, our leading man just stops talking, blankly staring while other one-note characters brief him on what to do, only regaining his voice again for a rousing speech several hours later. It's not a big deal, it just sticks out to me as weird that the hero of the story, who is shown to be reasonably chatty when we first meet him, suddenly becomes mute, outside of jarringly stitched-together orders during gameplay.
Pull out, all of you!
Freedom Fighters is a third-person shooter with squad command elements. Levels are split into a handful of zones with different objectives to tackle in each, though they all boil down to either rescuing prisoners, blowing stuff up, or capturing key structures by raising an American flag on the roof, because everyone knows that once you stake your flag on something, there is a strict no-takesies-backsies policy. The order in which you go about completing objectives does have some impact. For example, blowing up a helipad early will save you from having to deal with attack choppers later. And if you find yourself having trouble in a particular area, you're free to use manholes dotted around the environment to travel between sections, and they also act as save points. Now, for the first couple hours, both when I tried playing it some years ago and now, this game didn't really do much for me. I mean, it was alright, but aspects of its design really held back my enjoyment. First and foremost, I didn't think the combat was all that great. Weapons have pretty solid impact, and the way enemies ragdoll when killed is satisfying, but there's a weird built-in inaccuracy to the shooting, causing bullets to uncontrollably weave around targets. I could understand this happening if I was just dumping rounds towards someone at a distance, but even if you carefully line up your shot, have your crosshair directly over a bad guy, and fire one shot at a time, you'll find bullets routinely going everywhere but where you're aiming. To be fair, Freedom Fighters isn't really meant to be played by picking off guys at range on a regular basis, clearly favoring a more get-up-in-their-face run-and-gun approach, but with the sheer overwhelming odds you're up against, this aggression is hard to maintain without some luck and an abundance of medkits. This is where your friendly squad mates are meant to come in. You're able to issue a handful of basic orders to those that follow you: attack, defend, and regroup, which all work exactly how you expect. The friendly AI is actually pretty decent at dealing with threats, though there are times where they'll run right past someone shooting them in the back, and you'll also see them attempt to stay in cover if they're near an appropriate surface. These guys are good to have around, and would seem to be the counterbalance to the finicky gunplay I just mentioned, but during the opening hours, you only have a few battle buddies by your side, and they aren't enough to be effective against the waves upon waves of Russians you're tasked to deal with. I found myself bashing my head against early fights, slowly chipping away at enemy numbers, constantly having to burn medkits to revive my fallen brothers and sisters. I wasn't having the best of times. But at a certain point, things just sort of click, and I was finally able to appreciate Freedom Fighters and respect its status as a cult classic. So, what changed? As you complete objectives, you earn XP, or Charisma, as the game calls it, and each time you earn enough Charisma to fill this meter up here, your maximum number of squad mates is increased by 1, eventually maxing out at 12. It's once you have 5 or 6 fellow Resistance fighters by your side that the game becomes consistently fun, and only gets better from there as your fighting strength further improves. Not only do more friendlies mean more firepower, but also more distractions for the Soviets to focus on, leaving you free to mop up. You truly feel the tides of power shifting the more you play, going from struggling foot soldier to dominating general, and I'm curious as to whether that was the developer's intent. If it was, it's actually pretty neat to have the gameplay directly reflect the gradual rise of the Resistance over their oppressors, but on the other hand, the opening hours can't help but feel like a pain as you're struggling just to move down a city street. There is one mission in the second half that takes away your squad mates to remind you this was indeed made by the Hitman people, by having Chris assassinate a primary antagonist all on his own, but the game is smart enough to pull back on enemy numbers during this point, so it's not much of an inconvenience. That was my experience with the game on PC, but conveniently enough, when I bought Freedom Fighters years ago on a whim, it was actually for the OG Xbox, so let's play a bit of that and see if it's any different. The core game is pretty much the same, with identical content, aside from a 4-player split-screen multiplayer mode that I can't play, which only had 3 maps, so not much worth talking about there. The major difference is in how it controls. You tell me, do you notice something missing on your screen right now? Yeah, there's no crosshair this time. Freedom Fighters on console actually relies entirely on an auto-aim system. You point in the general direction of the bad guys, and the game pretty much does the rest, really hammering home that run-and-gun playstyle. The zoomed-in view does have a reticle, but it feels incredibly stiff on a thumbstick, and bullets still seem like they're always being pulled in ways that cause them to go around your target rather than where you're aiming. And I think I just figured out why the shooting in the PC version feels off. The game was obviously made with console in mind, which uses auto-aim, and that's at odds with the more precise aiming that comes with a mouse. So those times on PC when I felt my rounds were dancing around where I wanted them to go were the result of the automatic and manual systems conflicting with one another. At least that's my speculation. I'm sure someone smarter than me will let me know if I'm right. Regardless of the platform you play it on, Freedom Fighters is overall a blast to play through over its 5 to 6 hour run. There is that hump to get over at the start, and it's far from the greatest third-person action game I've ever played. But once you have that decent-sized battalion by your side, everything comes together, and it only continues to get better from there. As their first divergence from Agent 47's exploits, this was a solid start for IO, and proved they could make something worthwhile outside of their established IP. It's a shame, then, that their next non-Hitman project would demonstrate the exact opposite.
Snap the fuck out of it!
On November 13th, 2007, Jeff Gerstmann, one of the most well-known and respected figures in the gaming industry, and at the time editorial director for GameSpot.com, posted his review of Kane Lynch: Dead Men. He ultimately scored the game a 6.0 out of 10, although the harsh wording in both the written and video portions of his critique made it clear he was not a fan of what was at the time IO's latest. This came after a massive advertising push for the game all across the site, and after a combination of pressure from publisher Eidos Interactive, and the suits in charge of GameSpot's parent company CNET not understanding the meaning of integrity, on November 28th, Gerstmann was called into a room and abruptly fired. In addition to that, the wording of his review was heavily altered after the fact to soften its overall negative tone. This sparked immediate and severe outrage from the site's reader base, as well as many journalists, among them other prominent GameSpot staff, many of which would leave the site soon after. It was a tremendous blow to the site's reputation and talent that it would never fully recover from. As for Jeff, he would go on to co-found the excellent GiantBomb.com with his friend, the late, great, and always missed Ryan Davis, where several of his fellow GameSpot alum would be brought on as contributors. I was an avid reader of GameSpot back in the day, watching this all unfold as it happened, and afterward, Giant Bomb became my primary source for all things gaming related. I still watch their content to this day, though nowhere near as religiously as I once did. Around now, you may be wondering why I opened this section with a controversy surrounding Kane Lynch and not details about the game itself. Well, the reason is that whole GameSpot kerfuffle is the most interesting thing IO's criminal-led shooter ever brought to the table, and replaying it now, I can say with complete confidence that Jeff's 6 out of 10 was far too generous. Former mercenary Kane is a man living out his final days on death row when he's broken free during a transport by the medicated, mentally unstable Lynch and several other masked assailants. This isn't a cause for celebration, though, as it turns out the escape was orchestrated by Kane's former associates, known as the Seven. They accuse him of stealing a large sum of money and make it clear they have no intention of sparing his life, but also reveal that unless he returns the cash, Kane's estranged wife and daughter will be killed as punishment. He's given 3 weeks to complete the task, with Lynch tagging along to keep tabs on things, and the two set off on their bloody trail of misery and revenge. It's a bleak setup, and I will give IO some credit for choosing to tell a gritty story that doesn't shy away from the harsh or the violent, but it fails in its execution. To start, pretty much every character, from our protagonists to the villains and everyone in between, is an unlikable, irredeemable asshole. Now, that's not inherently a negative on its own, and does seem to be the point. After all, bad people can be just as deep and complex as anyone else. But without quality writing to back them up, everyone here is one note, lacking any real depth. It's just bad people doing bad things, and after the third mass murder event you take part in, it becomes routine and boring. The pacing is also rushed, jumping from scene to scene, which again hurts any possible development. If there were quieter moments where Kane and Lynch considered their actions, or delved into their past for more than just a passing line from time to time, they could have been compelling, but the game never takes its foot off the pedal, so you have no reason to care about these guys one way or the other. Plus, side characters enter and leave the plot on a whim depending on whether or not it needs them anymore, and are given so little personality and screen time that I can't tell you any of their names. The only thing I ever felt from the narrative was frustration when Kane continued to put Lynch in charge of vital components to his plan, despite knowing full well the man is prone to sudden, violent outbursts as demonstrated by him gunning down a room full of hostages during their first job together. Though in Lynch's defense, I'd probably freak out too if everyone around me was T-posing. There are setups for potentially cool set pieces, like a bank heist, a skyscraper assault, and a prison break, but without proper build-up and lackluster presentation, they don't have staying power, and since the gameplay isn't good enough to fall back on, much of the experience feels like a chore. Gather round, kids, and let me tell you the tale of Craig trying to play Kane Lynch on PC. Things were actually working fine at first. I did have to deal with the always wonderful Games for Windows Live barrier, but that was a simple workaround. I wasn't enjoying myself, but at least everything was working as intended. Right up until around 40 minutes in when I got to this chase sequence. It was smooth sailing for the opening section, but then I got to this point where you're forced to get out of the van you're in and clear a roadblock set up in a tunnel. Managed to do that easily enough, but when our unstoppable crime duo got back in the van to continue the chase, Turns out a squad car had become stuck in front of the van's preset path, and with no ability to get it out of the way even after multiple checkpoint resets, all I could do was restart the entire level. Annoying, sure, but not the end of the world. Then this happened.
Bruh.
That was a cop car spawning inside of the van, which instantly downs Lynch, and with no way to revive your partner during this part, he eventually bleeds out and it's game over. This happened 6 fucking times. You'd think that when planning this murder spree through the city streets, we would have taken into account the Popo's wizard powers, but that seems to have slipped everybody's minds. Essentially soft-locked at this point, as even fully quitting and restarting the game did not fix this issue, I tried everything I could think of. I thought maybe locking the frame rate would help, but nope, same problem. Then I tried various compatibility modes, and while they did resolve the Harry Potter bullshit, it introduced a delightful hard crash during the tunnel section. After being booted to my desktop for the 3rd time, and unable to find any help on the internets, I completely gave up on playing Dead Men. But I still had a video to do, so you know what I did? I bought it again, this time on Xbox 360. That's right, I spent another $20 on this garbage, which is 3 times what it goes for on Steam nowadays, just so I could continue playing and capturing footage. Don't say I never made any sacrifices for you. Kane Lynch Dead Men is a third-person shooter with squad command elements. If that descriptor sounds familiar, it should, because it's exactly how I described Freedom Fighters. It may surprise some of you to discover that this game here is meant to be the spiritual successor to that cult classic. Please allow me to express my deepest sympathies to any and all Freedom Fighters fans. Both games share very similar systems if compared side by side, except one does all of them exceptionally worse than the other. The artificial inaccuracy is carried over into Kane Lynch, but it's cranked up to ridiculous levels as bullets veer wildly away from where the crosshair is pointing with just about every weapon. You're basically crossing your fingers with each trigger squeeze, hoping some of your shots are going where the hell you want them to. It feels bad on a mouse, and only feels worse on an analog stick. The main thing this game adds to the shooting is a cover system, and it's one of the clunkiest I've ever seen. There is no button for cover. That would make too much sense. Kane will automatically press against something and hunker down whenever he feels like, and I do mean whenever he feels like. It's an unreliable system, where you'll stick to walls when you don't mean to, and fail to do so when you're being riddled with lead. Even better, sometimes you'll still take damage when hidden, and without a button to tell the game you want to exit cover, all you can do is move the thumbstick away from the wall you're on, and wait a second for the game to realize you're trying to unstick. It's kind of baffling how poor each part of the gunplay feels, to the point where I can safely say that every single Hitman has better combat than this, even Codename 47. But hey, that's what your friendly AI squad mates are for, right? I mean, Freedom Fighters really shined once you had a posse helping you out, so that must also be the case here. Well, no, actually, your teammates suck. How many guys you have with you each level is determined by the story, but it maxes out at 4. You can give them the same basic commands to attack, defend, and regroup, but not only are your comrades not very good at holding their own, often getting repeatedly downed forcing you to risk your neck reviving them, but it's not uncommon for them to blatantly refuse your orders. You'll tell them to regroup or defend a position, and they'll quite literally tell you to go fuck yourself. This is especially egregious when you're running low on ammo, which will prompt Kane to ask his companions for more. Sometimes they'll help out. Other times they'll act like spoiled kids that never learn to share.
Come on! I'm dry. Anyone got some ammo? Tough shit. I'm not sharing.
Having bad teammates is one thing. Having bad teammates that actively deny you aid is insanity. While present throughout the entire game, all of these combined flaws are really brought into the spotlight in the game's 3rd act, where the difficulty jarringly spikes, shifting the game from no fun to negative fun. You're up against overwhelming numbers, tanks, and helicopters, and with lobotomized teammates that prove to be more a liability than a help, this is where I expect even the biggest Kane Lynch apologists consider throwing in the towel. With a lame campaign, the only thing left to talk about is the Fragile Alliance multiplayer, which does present a cool idea on paper, though I was unable to play it for myself nowadays. Players are tasked with pulling off a heist, battling their way through waves of police to reach an extraction point, and anyone that survives has the take evenly split between them. The catch is that at any point, someone can go traitor, choosing to turn on their partners and attempt to take the entire score for themselves. In theory, this leads to tense matches where you're forced to be wary of the same guys you're fighting side by side with, while also having the temptation to betray the group yourself. But in reality, the idea wasn't fleshed out. With only 4 maps at launch, each of which could be finished in around 5 minutes, with spawns happening at the same places every run, the mode severely lacked value and replayability. And while the concept of going turncoat at any time was intriguing for a few rounds, players quickly realized that it generally wasn't worth the risk to stab your friends in the back, and anyone that planned to do so would wait until the last possible moment, making the turn predictable. Credit to IO for the interesting idea, but without the depth or content, any potential it had quickly dried up. Kane Lynch Dead Men is a bad game. In my opinion, it's the worst thing IO has ever made. You can see some decent ideas sprinkled throughout, but they amount to very little when everything about the product surrounding them is so crappy. It fails in pretty much everything it sets out to do, and while even the best developers are bound to stumble once or twice over their lifetime, it's truly shocking to me just how far a dip in quality this was compared to their other work. That's why it surprised me all the more when they decided to make a sequel.
This is fucking stupid!
Next, let's talk about the follow-up that no one asked for, Kane Lynch 2 Dog Days, released in 2010. Some of you may notice that I'm breaking my usual chronological pattern here, as this was not actually the next title IO put out, but I decided to lump both Kane Lynch entries together for an easier side-by-side comparison, and also because the other game they made that I haven't talked about yet is such a departure from their usual MO that it's best saved for last. You'll understand when we get there. Kane Lynch 2 is set 4 years after the events of the last game. Lynch is living in Shanghai, working for a local criminal organization, and when he needs some backup for an upcoming deal, he calls Kane for help. Right off the bat, this setup seems off because these two guys aren't friends, and never were, so the idea that Lynch would call Kane in the first place, and that Kane would pick up and then agree to hop on a plane to China, is unbelievable to me. Anyway, as is always the case for anything involving this pair, things go wrong immediately, and the duo is forced to fight for their lives. While it could be argued that the story in Dead Men, while bad, at least had some ambition, the opposite is true of Dog Days. The plot here is so simple, so boilerplate, so dull, that you can sum up the whole thing in a sentence. Our protagonists fuck up, have to shoot a lot of people, and leave. The end. There is zero emotional weight and no compelling revelations. It's like playing the filler episodes of an overly long season from a television show. The most interesting part of the narrative is a scene where Kane and Lynch get tortured and must run and gun through the streets butt naked covered in gnarly cuts. It's the one sequence I'll remember because I can honestly say that I haven't seen that in a game before, and I don't really ever need to see it again. The first game put you in control of Kane when playing solo, but in the sequel, Lynch is given the role of leading man. Since being an unstable psychotic that often hallucinates while committing brutal acts is his main defining character trait, this switch-up had lots of potential. Imagine the creative or disturbing visual seeing the world through his eyes would allow for. Too bad the game cops out and says that Lynch is totally fine now. You see, he's on medication and has his violent episodes completely under control. The only remnants of Lynch's past self we get is him talking to himself during firefights.
I'm sick of this! I need my...
What a waste. At least the shooting is better. Everything has been streamlined, with features such as the squad commands completely removed, but given how poorly they were implemented before, I wouldn't call that a negative. It took a few games, but IO finally figured out how to make bullets go straight. For the most part. Certain weapons, like SMGs, do still have spread to them, but that's expected, and if a gun's firing pattern is going to be erratic, its crosshair lets you know that ahead of time. Gone are the days of unloading an entire magazine at one guy and praying he'll be dead when you let off the trigger. The cover system is also improved by having an actual button dedicated to the action this time. What a revelation! It's still not great, as once again there are times where you'll get hit even when hunkered down, and it lacks the fluid cover-to-cover transitions many other third-person shooters already had by this point, forcing you to expose yourself if you ever want to move position. Compared to Dead Men, it's a huge leap forward. Compared to its contemporaries in the genre, it's merely functional. That's pretty much how I can describe the entire experience, really. Functional and nothing else. The generic gunplay works how you'd expect, and with AI that only has 2 speeds, stay in place or rush your position, and basic predictable level layouts, the game falls into a pretty monotonous loop that goes on for 3 to 4 hours. It's not bad, it's not good, it just is. The main thing that gives Kane Lynch 2 its identity, and the thing that was focused on leading up to its release, is its style of presentation. The whole thing is presented as if it's being shot with a crappy handheld camcorder. The screen shakes, lights produce lens flare, things become out of focus, there's compression artifacting, explosions cause the image to become blown out, and various other effects are present to sell the illusion. These elements aren't optional, they can't be turned off, with the exception of camera bobbing when running, which I recommend doing because it made me feel sick almost immediately. I respect the game's dedication to this gimmick, and it does give Dog Days a unique flair, but at the end of the day, that's all it is. A gimmick. After about 30 minutes, it fades into the background and becomes something you don't even notice or think about. Although I will say applying a mosaic effect to headshots is a neat touch I appreciated the entire time. The implication that what you've done to some poor guy's face is so devastatingly gruesome that you're not allowed to see it is pretty funny. Since it was generally agreed upon that the best idea Kane Lynch had going for it was the Fragile Alliance multiplayer, it's no surprise it returned in the sequel with some changes made to flesh out the concept. Aside from the base advantage of better gameplay, an offline version of the mode with bots was included, which makes up all the footage you're seeing now that let you get a feel for the concept and explore the maps before jumping online. Lastly, a variant of the mode called Undercover Cop made its debut, which secretly tasked one of the players in your group with stopping the heist. Any team kills performed by the chosen player would be hidden from the others, giving them a chance to play off their handiwork, but they were also restricted in that they weren't allowed to kill any law enforcement, having to shoot around NPCs to avoid suspicion. I remember this one time playing some Undercover Cop when this game released, and a guy told the lobby he wouldn't be playing around in order to take a phone call. We all thought that was a perfectly logical reason to sit out, so we ran ahead to start the heist, only for him to come up behind us and shoot us all in the back when we were distracted. It was moments like that where the entire idea of this mode really shined. However, much like its predecessor, the multiplayer severely lacked value. There was more to it, sure, but by once again only offering a handful of small maps which played out in the same way every single time, there wasn't much to keep players coming back after a session or two. I understand that each heist was short to keep things moving and to prevent players from sitting out for long periods, but there needed to be multiple routes or randomized events, something to keep it interesting. As is, it was a better executed version of the Fragile Alliance pitch that was fun for a bit, but quickly got repetitive and lacked any staying power. Kane Lynch 2 is a game that never needed to exist. It's not a painful experience or anything, it's just a nothing experience. Essentially, it's the Jai Courtney of video games. It's there, you recognize it when you see it, and it leaves no impact one way or the other. The only thing Dog Days will ever be remembered for is starting that 4 hours Angry Joe meme. And also the naked part, that's forever burned into my hippocampus. So that's 2 duds from IO in a row, and we only have one game left to talk about. It's pretty clear by now that gritty crime-themed shooters just weren't their strong suit. But their final non-Hitman title actually diverges from that formula and tries something completely different that you wouldn't expect from the studio. What if I told you that the house that made the ultimate assassin simulator also made a children's game? I don't think it's a stretch to say that the overwhelming amount of us associate IO with mature, violent video games. Their most well-known IP is all about creative kills. Kane and Lynch leave a trail of bodies in their wake while dropping F-bombs every other word. Even their tamest title, the T-rated Freedom Fighters, revolves around shooting a whole bunch of bad guys. So it might leave some of you bewildered to learn that the very same IO Interactive also developed a cartoony game about child ninjas on a quest to save all the adorable woodland creatures. I am not making this up. Mini Ninjas came out in 2009, and for obvious reasons, stands out from the studio's catalog. It wasn't some minor success either, selling well enough to warrant a couple spin-off titles by different studios for Kinect and mobile, and even got turned into a full-fledged cartoon show which I checked out an episode of.
You'll learn that sharing's fun, even tidying up with friends.
Yep, sharing's a ninja value.
It's terrible. But we're getting sidetracked. How's the actual game itself? Well, try not to freak out when I tell you this, but outside of anything Hitman related, Mini Ninjas might be the best thing IO has made. The evil warlord has returned, disrupting the era of peace brought upon by his previous defeat. He begins amassing an army by taking a page right out of Dr. Robotnik's Guide to Villainy, using dark magics to transform cute, innocent animals into samurai warriors. Sensing the approaching danger, a wise ninja master sends his top disciple to investigate, only for them to not return. Then, he sends his second best disciple. And third. And fourth. And now, with no other options, he's forced to rely on the clumsy hero, yes, our hero's name is literally Hero, to save his friends and restore peace to the land. I don't think I need to break down the plot anymore because it's as simple as it sounds and never strives to be anything more. There's a boss that fights you by farting, for crying out loud. It's a fine setup for a game aimed at kids, so let's leave it at that and not question things like why a village of anthropomorphic birds is raising what are essentially child soldiers. There is one issue with the game on PC I'd like to address up front. Generally, the game runs fine. This isn't exactly Crysis we're dealing with here, but you may notice that some of the footage from earlier parts of the game has this consistent slight stutter to it that happens every few seconds. This is called micro-stuttering, and is the result of the game not liking certain motherboard chipset combinations. Since Mini Ninjas doesn't require much precision, these hitches don't get in the way, but depending on your tolerance for visual imperfections, they may very well drive you mad. The solution to this issue, aside from building a new PC, is to unplug all of your unnecessary USB devices and hope it resolves itself. Doing so stopped the stutters for me, but I didn't make that adjustment until I had already played for 2.5 hours. So if you see micro-stuttering in any of the footage, just know it's not on your end. I'm just too lazy to replay the opening portions. What we have here is a basic action-adventure game with platforming, combat, and collectibles to find. Levels are pretty lengthy with easy-to-follow layouts, having an obvious main path, with any notable deviations leading to one of the many knickknacks completionists may want to snag. Whether you're jumping gaps or hopping up walls, traversing the environment is easy, with incredibly forgiving timing and leisurely animations, and a lack of fall damage ensures that even if you do make a mistake, the only punishment for doing so is the brief period of time needed to retry. It's so simple, in fact, that abilities the game teaches you early on, wall running and shimmying on ledges, are used maybe 2 or 3 times each the entire playthrough. You might expect a game about ninjas to have some stealth elements, and while it technically does, it really doesn't. The most you can do is hide in tall grass and bushes to avoid detection, and if you sneak up on an enemy, you can perform a backstab that's almost always an insta-kill. And that's the extent of that. You're not meant to avoid enemies entirely, there's no reward or incentive for doing so. Plus, stabbing them repeatedly is the only way to save all the bunnies and foxes from their life of forced servitude, so grab that blade and shank those samurai! Combat is also straightforward, having a single attack button along with a block, guard break, and dodge roll. While there are various enemy types to deal with, a strategy of button mashing until bad thing fall down will get you by in most circumstances. For maximum effectiveness, throw in a guard break every few swings to stagger your foe during the assault. Works like a charm. I basically never touched the block button for the majority of my run, only being forced to do so when a late game baddie was introduced that pretty much required it. My description might make the fighting seem boring when stretched over an entire game, and while no, this isn't exactly God of War, I actually found it entertaining throughout thanks to its relatively fast-paced nature and the varied playable characters adding variety. As you progress in the story, Hero rescues his fellow ninja pals, who can then be switched to on the fly at any time. There are 6 ninja in total, and while the basic button mashing loop never really changes, their unique animations and abilities are enough to shake things up whenever combat starts feeling stale, especially when the red orbs needed to activate these abilities are dropped by enemies like Skittles. However, as with most groups of playable protagonists in games, some prove to be much more useful than others. Hero is the one you'll be using most often. Aside from being the guy you start with, his ability to take out multiple targeted foes in a flash is endlessly effective. He's also the only one that can use magic spells found at hidden shrines throughout the game, but most of the 12 spells he finds are more of a novelty you'll use once to see what they do, and then never again. Then there's Futo, the tank of the group, who is honestly kinda useless. He does do more damage, but he's just too slow to be fun to use, so the only time I ever brought him out was to deal with these beefy dudes that are designed specifically for him to defeat. Suzume is another good one, using her flute to daze groups, opening them up to a series of one-hit kills. Shun is an archer that lets you take out guys at range and has a firework for crowds, but his use is rather situational. Tora can run really fast, and that's literally it, so he's pointless. And finally, there's Kunoichi and her devastating spin attack that does wonders for mopping up bad guys. So that's 3.5 out of the 6 I'd recommend using on a regular basis. I've seen worse team compositions. So if you haven't caught on by now, Mini Ninjas isn't exactly going to be compared to Dark Souls anytime soon. It's an easygoing experience that anyone above the target age demographic will be able to breeze through. Having all but the final boss consist of mainly QuickTime events should be proof enough of that. But just because a game lacks challenge doesn't mean it isn't fun. It has a charming quality to it, especially the animations, with my favorites being the use of an oversized hat as a boat, and the quick pitter-patter of our ninja's feet whenever running. Just look at those things go! And while the fighting is basic, it's continually satisfying to pop an ability and quickly deal with an entire group in seconds. Sure, some things about the game annoyed me a bit, like some poorly placed invisible barriers, and it's jarring whenever the camera randomly shifts to a fixed perspective for certain structures, but I still enjoyed myself. I'm not gonna go bragging to my friends that I conquered mini ninjas, but gosh darn it, I had fun! And ultimately, that's what's important. Can I guarantee that you'll like mini ninjas too? No. But as long as you go in with the proper expectations and are in the mood for a laid-back beat-em-up/collectathon, I think you'll have a good time. If you're old enough to pass the required ID check when buying the rest of IO's catalog, it's an enjoyable enough game provided you're not a total curmudgeon. But if you have a younger sibling or a child of your own and are looking for something age-appropriate for them to play, I think Mini Ninjas is a great choice that you won't feel guilty about and that they'll be able to look back on fondly when they get older. And it's suddenly dawning on me that I just recommended a game to kids that was made by the Hitman people. The universe is weird sometimes. Whew! Now that I have this video on the books, I can declare far and wide that I have officially covered everything IO Interactive has made to date. As far as their non-Hitman projects go, it was a 50-50 split between good and bad, but that's just my opinion. I'm sure there are plenty of you out there that played a couple of these games yourself, so in the comments, please share your own thoughts. Maybe some of you loved Kane Lynch for some reason. I'd be fascinated to know why. Before you go, be sure to leave a rating to let me know if you enjoyed the content, consider subscribing to the channel for more, and if you're interested in all things IO and haven't seen my overview of Mr. 47's adventures, consider giving that a watch if you have another hour to spare. Thank you for making it all the way to the end, and have yourself a great day. God damn it. Finally!